I'm Richard Hefner, your host on The Open Mind. My guest today has been labeled this country's foremost conservative economist. Milton Friedman of the University of Chicago, of Newsweek magazine, and of wherever it is that persons of brilliance and concern gather to discuss the fate of individual liberty in the midst of ever-expanding governmental responsibilities. Professor Friedman, I wonder if I might begin the program by saying that you're a kind and a gentle man, yet you're identified by many with those who seem, to those who make that identification, to want us not to do kind and gentle things, perhaps not provide for the poor, perhaps not provide for the aged. And I wonder how you'd reconcile these phenomena and whether you feel that it's fair to characterize you as a conservative economist.
Well, let me start at the end of that first. I never characterize myself as a conservative economist. As I understand the English language, conservative means conserving, keeping things as they are. I don't want to keep things as they are. The true conservatives today are the people who are in favor of ever bigger government. The people who call themselves liberals today, the New Dealers, they are the true conservatives because they want to keep going on the same path we're going on. I would like to dismantle that. I call myself a liberal in the true sense of liberal, in the sense in which it means of and pertaining to freedom. Now that brings me to your second point. One of the great mistakes is to judge policies and programs by their intentions rather than their results. We all know a famous road that is paved with good intentions. The people who go around talking about their soft heart, I admire them for the softness of their heart. But unfortunately, it very often extends to their head as well. Because the fact is that the programs that are labeled as being for the poor, for the needy, almost always have effects exactly the opposite of those which their well-intentioned sponsors intend them to have.
As an example, what are you referring to?
Let me give you a very simple example. Take the minimum wage law. It's well-meaning sponsors. There are always in these cases two groups of sponsors. There are the well-meaning sponsors and there are the special interests who are using the well-meaning sponsors as front men. You almost always, when you have bad programs, have an unholy coalition of the do-gooders on the one hand and the special interests on the other. The minimum wage law is as clear a case as you could want. The special interests are, of course, the trade unions, the monopolistic craft trade unions in particular. The do-gooders believe that by passing a law saying that nobody shall get less than $2 an hour or $2.50 an hour or whatever the minimum wage is, you are helping poor people who need the money. You are doing nothing of the kind. What you are doing is to assure that people whose skills are not sufficient to justify that kind of a wage will be unemployed. It is no accident that the teenage unemployment rate, the unemployment rate among teenagers in this country, is over twice as high as the overall unemployment rate. It's no accident that that was not always the case. Until the 1950s, when the minimum wage rate was raised very drastically, very quickly, teenage unemployment was higher than ordinary unemployment because, of course, the teenagers are the ones who are just coming into the labor market. They're searching and finding jobs, and it's understandable that on the average they would have be unemployed more. But it was nothing like the extraordinary level it has now reached. It's close to 20%. Why? Because the minimum wage law is most properly described as a law saying employers must discriminate against people who have low skills. That's what the law says. The law says here's a man who has a skill which would justify a wage rate of $1.50, $2 an hour. You may not employ him. It's illegal because you have to. If you employ him, you have to pay him $2.50. Well, what's the result? To employ him at $2.50 is to engage in charity. Now, there's nothing wrong with charity. But most employers are not in a position where they can engage in that kind of charity. Thus, the consequences of minimum wage rates have been almost wholly bad, to increase unemployment and to increase poverty. Moreover, the effects have been concentrated on the groups that the do-gooders would most like to help. The people who have been hurt most by minimum wage laws are the blacks. I have often said that the most anti-Negro law on the books of this land is the minimum wage rate. And so I think the real answer to your question is that you must not judge a bottle solely by its label. You have to look at what's inside and see what the law or the measure produces.
If one looked at the label, though, and perhaps one of those government regulations that you would look askance at is that we look at labels. If one looked at the label and identified the objective of minimum wages, are there no positive, legitimate objectives achieved by minimum wage?
None whatsoever. In my opinion, there is absolutely no positive objective achieved by minimum wages. Its real purpose is to reduce competition for the trade unions and make it easier for them to maintain the wages of their privileged members higher than the others. And again, go back to my earlier point. Is there any group in this country that has been more discriminatory in its effects than the trade unions? It used to be at one time, to take this point of yours, Father, you and I are both old enough to remember that it used to be lèse-majesté to criticize trade unions. The trade unions were on the side of the angels. And it was an automatic, conditioned reflex on the part of any intelligent, well-meaning man. If you said trade union, good. That's changed. And desirably it's changed. Why has it changed? Because the harm which they do has become so absolutely obvious and patent that even the most innocent and naive of well-meaning people, he may still have a warm feeling in his heart for labor, but he no longer makes the mistake of equating labor with labor unionists.
Do you feel this way about other aspects of social legislation that designed to protect the aged, the sick, the needy?
I have often, in talking to audiences, especially liberal audiences, offered them a challenge. I have said, I challenge you to name me a single social measure which has accomplished its intended objectives rather than the opposite, which has not done more harm than good, and that includes Social Security. Social Security, the objective is fine, again. And again, the objective of the minimum wage law is fine. I approve it. What I'm objecting to is the means by which it's done. But the objective of Social Security is fine. But what has it in fact done? There is in this country today no tax which is more regressive and more objectionable than the tax which is levied on payrolls, supposedly in the name of financing Social Security. No, the most fantastic piece of Madison Avenue salesmanship that has been done in the 20th century has been the brilliant stroke of linking together a regressive payroll tax with a bad system of welfare payments, calling the two Social Security and selling them as if they were a bundle.
Now, you say Madison Avenue techniques. That means there were men with black hats on. Who?
The do-good reformers who have sold these programs to the American people by telling them things that they knew were not true.
That they knew were not?
That they knew were not true. One of the things that always shocks me is how people whom I would trust, maybe not with my wife, but certainly with my pocketbook, in their private capacity, whom I would never question the integrity of, will in their public capacity, because they believe that it's in the best interest of other people, lie to the American people. Let me give you a simple example with Social Security, if I may. Social Security has a tax, as you know. That tax is supposedly divided into two parts. Half supposedly paid directly by the employee and half paid by the employer, 5.65% by each. Now, the economics of the matter is that fundamentally there is no distinction between these two parts. The part for which the employer writes the check is also paid by the employee. When Social Security system engages in propaganda, when it gives out information about the Social Security system, it always talks about the cost to the employee in terms solely of his part. I achieved what I thought was an enormous breakthrough about 3 years ago when in a public debate with Wilbur Cohen, at that time Secretary of HEW, I got him to admit in public, for the first time that this has ever been done to my knowledge in Social Security literature, that the employer's part was also borne by the employee. Now, Wilbur Cohen is an honorable man.
In what way is it borne by the employee?
His wage is lower than it otherwise would be. If you're an employer, if you're hiring a man, what's the cost of that man to you? It's what you pay him in wages, including his part of Social Security, plus what you pay him in Social Security tax. You couldn't care less whether he cost you $150 a week, of which $20 was tax and $130 wage, or whether he cost you $150 a week, all of which was tax. Couldn't make any difference to you.